They never wanted you to see it, but you always did. From a young age, there was something about the world that didn't sit right in your bones. You couldn't name it, not then. Not when you sat in classrooms and learned how to raise your hand, how to smile politely, how to echo the answers they fed you. You couldn't articulate the ache you felt as you walked through halls plastered with hollow slogans, surrounded by faces rehearsing joy, ambition, purpose. But you felt it. A discomfort, a pressure, a faint nausea behind every promise. Even when you were praised, something in you remained still. Even when you succeeded, something in you stayed untouched. And so, you began to doubt yourself, not the world, because the world had answers, systems, rituals, rewards. You were the one who hesitated. You were the one who couldn't fully believe. They told you were anxious, depressed, difficult, disengaged. They gave you names for your alienation, as if naming it would neutralize it. But the ache remained, and the longer you lived, the louder it grew. You watched others take to the game so naturally, how they threw themselves into the roles, the romantic, the achiever, the rebel, the spiritual seeker, how they spent themselves to fit the shapes demanded of them, how they spoke with certainty about things you could only feel through fog. And again, you wondered, what's wrong with me? Why can't I surrender to it like they do? Why does every joy feel pre-packaged, every ambition like theater? You blamed yourself, until one day you stopped, not because you found clarity, but because the exhaustion of pretending became too heavy. And in that heaviness, a space opened, a silence. And in that silence, you began to see, the world is not broken. It is a lie that functions perfectly. A system built not to awaken you, but to keep you obedient. Not through force, but through longing. Through carefully crafted stories that teach you to dream in a specific direction, and to hate yourself for not arriving. The world is a dream you are charged to believe in, and the currency you pay is not only your time, not only your energy, but your authenticity. To belong, you must wear the mask. To succeed, you must pretend to care. To be loved, you must be digestible. You are not asked to see, you are asked to perform, and every time you perform, the lie grows stronger. Schopenhauer knew this. The world as representation is not reality. It is illusion, illusion shaped by the will. The will needs motion, not truth. And so it builds a world that rewards belief and punishes vision. It hands you dreams that exhaust you, tasks that hollow you, ideals that fracture you. And when you stumble under their weight, it tells you, try harder, want more, be better. But now, finally, you hesitate. You don't want more. You want to understand. You don't need to succeed. You need to see. And what you begin to see is devastating. You were never the problem, the lie was, and you've been paying for it all along. The world does not ask for your consent. It asks for your compliance. From the moment you are old enough to be taught, the transaction begins. You are handed a set of stories, each one carefully wrapped in promise. Stories about love, that it will complete you. Stories about work, that it will dignify you. Stories about success, that it will redeem your suffering. You do not question the transaction at first because the price is disguised. It does not feel like a loss to follow the path, to seek approval, to fit in. It feels like becoming someone. But slowly the debt accumulates. You trade your voice for acceptance. You trade your questions for applause. You trade your discomfort for the warmth of inclusion. And in doing so, you begin to vanish. Not visibly, not dramatically, but slowly, in fragments. The laugh that doesn't quite reach your eyes, the smile that conceals fatigue, the certainty you mimic but do not feel. Every performance becomes a payment, every role a fee. You are not just participating, you are buying in. And what you are buying is not peace, not clarity, not truth. You are buying a seat in a theater where the script is written by a will that does not care whether you understand it, only that you repeat it. The price is not always visible. It shows up as restlessness, as emptiness after achievement, as a hunger you can't name, even after it has been fed. You work harder, you love deeper, you strive nobler, and still, something in you remains unfed. That something is the part of you that remembers, the part that never agreed. They call it growing up. They say this is what it means to be an adult, to cope, to contribute, to move on. But beneath those commands lives the truth. You are being conditioned to serve the illusion. Not because anyone is evil, not because the system is flawed, but because the will that underlies all things is blind, and blindness perpetuates itself through repetition. If the lie stopped working, the world would collapse. So, it must be maintained. And it is maintained through you. You work not to live, but to justify your existence. You love not to connect, but to validate your worth. You speak not to be known, but to be accepted. The currency you spend is your essence. And the return is never enough, because it was never meant to be. Even your moments of rebellion are pre-packaged. The world sells you identities of dissent, brands of nonconformity. You are allowed to resist as long as your resistance does not threaten the structure, as long as you keep buying, as long as you keep needing. Even the search for meaning becomes a product. Even your disillusionment is monetized. You begin to see this in the faces of others, how they speak with bright eyes about their next step, their next milestone, their next big thing. But you hear the tremor beneath it, the fragility, the desperate hope that this time the lie will finally feel like truth. You see it in yourself, the way you've tried to make it work, tried to believe. You've spent years offering yourself to the dream, begging it to feel real, and now you no longer have the strength to pretend. The most dangerous part of the lie is not that it deceives you, it's that it convinces you to deceive yourself. You begin to doubt your own doubt. You gaslight your own soul. You tell yourself that clarity is cynicism, that fatigue is weakness, that seeing too much is a flaw to be corrected. But now, finally, the voice within you refuses to be silenced, and what it says is not dramatic. It is simple, cold, and irreversible. This isn't real. You've spent so long paying for a place in a world that never wanted the real you, only your participation. And now, the cost has become too great. There comes a moment, not marked by any ceremony, where the architecture of your life begins to feel like scenery on a stage. The people around you move like actors. The rules you follow seem drawn from a script written by no one you've ever known, and the voice in your head, once assumed to be yours, begins to sound suspiciously like the crowd. You look around and realize the world is not what you thought it was. It is not a collection of truths waiting to be discovered. It is a carefully maintained hallucination, built by the will, propagated through desire, and sustained by your own participation. It is not merely false, it is functional. It doesn't exist to liberate you, but to use you. And the more you question it, the more obvious it becomes. The smiles, the symbols, the incentives, none of it leads to peace. It leads to further involvement. And in that involvement, you vanish. Schopenhauer did not dress this up in hope. He saw with cruel clarity what others dared not name, that the inner essence of the world is not logic, nor love, nor divine order, but will, blind, unknowing, relentless will. The will is not evil. That would be easier. Evil implies intention. The will has none. It simply wants, and in its wanting, it builds. It builds through instinct in the animal, through delusion in the man, through form, tradition, morality, and myth. It has no destination. It does not evolve. It perpetuates. And it perpetuates through you, through the belief that the next goal, the next lover, the next success will finally end the hunger it created in the first place. And so, the illusion is maintained, not because you are weak, but because the will makes obedience feel like meaning. And to rebel against it feels like annihilation. Every system you live within, the social, the economic, the romantic, the existential, is a mechanism for disguising this truth. Religion offers you eternity. Career offers you status. Romance offers you completion. All of them are decorated masks stitched to the same face. The will seeking to replicate itself, to disguise the futility of desire with symbols of transcendence. But there is no transcendence. There is only repetition. What you think is love is often ownership. What you call purpose is often distraction. What you call success is a deeper level of captivity. You do not move forward. You circle. You consume. You decay. And still, you're told you are progressing. The world trains you not only to consume the lie, but to cherish it. You learn to doubt your doubts, to dismiss the parts of you that threaten to see clearly. The will rewards the dreamers who dream in the right direction. It praises the exhausted who keep smiling. It elevates the obedient who decorate their chains. And it punishes the lucid, not through violence, but through exile. Those who see too much are labeled bitter, broken, antisocial. But they are not broken. They are awake. And being awake in a world that thrives on sleep is not a blessing. It is a sentence. When you try to speak the truth, you find that language itself resists you. Every word has been stained by use. Every concept you reach for has been twisted into marketing. Even silence becomes a brand. Even rebellion becomes a trend. You begin to see that the lie is not just something you live within. It's something that has infested your very capacity to articulate what lies beyond it. You want to scream, but your scream has already been sold. You want to escape, but escape is now a lifestyle. The will leaves no place untouched. It adapts to every form. And so, the deeper you see, the more alone you become. Not because truth is obscure, but because so few are willing to live without illusion. This is where philosophy ceases to be abstract. It becomes anatomical. You begin to dissect the layers of your own belief. Why do you want what you want? Who taught you to value that? What reward are you really chasing? What fear are you serving beneath your mask of confidence? You peel back the layers until you find nothing beneath them. Not a self, but a watcher. Not a plan, but a pressure. The self you thought you were turns out to be a composite of strategies, echoes, learned gestures, and when they fall away, you do not ascend. You drop. You fall through all the scaffolding, through every assumption, through every hope, and what you find at the bottom is not despair, but the end of pretending. There is nothing left to chase, nothing left to prove. You stop investing in the lie. You stop believing that becoming someone will ever relieve you of what you've been carrying, because what you've been carrying is not a flaw. It is your awareness, buried alive. And now, at last, it opens its eyes. Once the machinery is seen, it cannot be unseen. Once the wires are exposed and the false ceiling collapses, you can no longer pretend to inhabit the illusion sincerely. The world keeps moving, of course. The actors continue their roles, the performances intensify, the rituals persist. But you stand within them now, as one who sees, and in that seeing, there is a grief deeper than any pain you have known. Not the grief of loss, but the grief of realization. The life you were chasing was never yours. The happiness you were promised was a tool. The love you believed in was too often a transaction wrapped in poetry. And your own longing, that sacred aching part of you, was hijacked, marketed, and sold back to you in pieces. To see this is not relief. It is a kind of death. The death of the one who believed. The death of the one who hoped. And yet this death is not a descent into nihilism. It is a breakthrough, but not in the way the world defines breakthroughs. It is not energizing. It is not empowering. It is still, quiet, brutal. It is the moment you stop asking to be healed and start listening to what your suffering has been trying to say all along. That you were not meant to live in a dream. That you were not born to perform. That your value was never meant to be measured by how well you play the game. This is the moment where the silence finally becomes holy. Not because it comforts, but because it no longer lies. You begin to feel differently. You still walk among others. You still speak. You still work. But it all feels like shadow play now. You no longer expect it to fulfill you. You no longer expect anyone to rescue you from the vacancy you feel. And strangely, this vacancy no longer frightens you. It becomes a space, not a wound. A space in which you can exist without pretending. A space in which you are no longer defined by what you believe or achieve, but by the quiet depth of what you now understand. That reality, unfiltered, unmasked, is not something to escape. It is something to enter with bare hands and unguarded eyes. In this new stillness, you begin to see that your suffering was never a curse. It was the signal that you were still alive beneath the roles. Every time the applause felt hollow, every time the smile felt false, every time the goal felt meaningless, those were not failures. They were fractures, cracks in the lie, proof that something real within you was resisting. And now, you honor that resistance. You no longer try to numb it or outrun it. You let it rise. And in its rising, you feel the weight of 1,000 abandoned selves returning, not to demand anything, just to be seen. There is no ecstasy here, no revelation, just a clean sorrow. A sorrow that does not demand explanation. A sorrow that says, you were deceived, and now you know. And in that knowing, you are reborn, not as someone stronger or better, but as someone who no longer needs to be anything at all. You do not need to be inspiring. You do not need to be resilient. You do not need to be radiant or wise or ascended. You simply need to stop lying. And once you do, the lie begins to fall away, not from the world, but from your place within it. You remain, not because the world has changed, but because your contract with it has ended. You no longer pay the toll of belief. You no longer invest in the dream. You participate when needed, but never with your soul. You give what is required, but never what is sacred, because the sacred is yours now, and it lives in the silence where the story used to be. You walk now without belief, not in despair, but in freedom. The world continues around you, a cascade of movement and speech and striving, but you are no longer inside it in the same way. You do not oppose it. You do not seek to reform it. You do not even despise it. You simply see it for what it is, a machinery of illusion, built by the will to perpetuate itself through the appearance of purpose. Others still kneel before its altars, still chase its promises, still measure their worth by their productivity, their romance, their virtue. You do not interrupt them, for now you understand, the lie needs believers. Without them, it cannot exist, and you are no longer among them. The price you once paid, belief, longing, obedience, is no longer extracted from you. You carry your awareness like a flame in the dark, not to guide others, but simply to remain warm yourself. You do not owe your clarity to anyone. You do not evangelize your detachment. You do not explain why you have stopped performing. You simply withdraw your participation. You inhabit the world like a ghost might inhabit a former home. You remember its contours, its customs, but you no longer call it yours. This is the quiet liberation Schopenhauer knew, the one not found in triumph, but in withdrawal. The will has not been conquered. It cannot be. It still moves through you, around you. It still stirs hunger, still creates dreams, still tempts you to believe again. But you recognize it now. You do not mistake its voice for your own. You let it speak, and then you let it pass. This is the freedom, not in overpowering the will, but in ceasing to identify with its needs. You become the observer, the witness of motion without being pulled into it. And in this witnessing, there is a serenity untouched by pleasure or pain, a calm that asks nothing, explains nothing, seeks nothing. You still feel pain. You still feel joy. But neither governs you. You watch them both arise and fade, like weather moving across a sky that does not belong to them. The core of your being is no longer invested in their passing. You are not numb, you are lucid. And this lucidity does not sparkle. It does not sell. It does not seduce. It simply abides, quietly, without ambition. The self you used to perform is gone. The roles you used to inhabit have emptied. And what remains is not a new identity, but a space, a still, unbranded space where nothing must happen for life to be allowed. They will still invite you to return. They will still offer new dreams, new stories, new currencies of meaning. But you will decline, not as a protest, but as a fact. You no longer need to buy the lie because you have seen what it costs. The slow erosion of truth, the displacement of self, the endless sacrifice of your real, unmarketable essence on the altar of illusion. You choose to remain outside the dream, not because the dream is over, but because it was never yours. And so you walk, not upward, not forward, but inward, not toward a future, but into the depth of what is. There is no applause here, no final moment of arrival, only the simple dignity of not pretending, the silent revolt of refusing to pay for your own captivity. You live now without narrative, without spectacle, without the need to become. You are not ascending, you are not improving, you are not manifesting, you are not attracting, you are not becoming the best version of yourself. You are remaining with what is, and what is, finally, does not ask to be improved, only to be seen. You are no longer paying to believe. You are no longer subscribing to the illusion. You are no longer funding the system with your longing. You are, at last, at peace with seeing, not because it healed you, but because it freed you from needing to be healed. If this stripped away a story you were told, leave a trace below. Write the lie you're no longer willing to pay for.